Here's a simple model that we follow to be able to develop our athlete's core each and every off season. Now, when it comes to developing the athlete's trunk, we need to understand that just like anything in performance, we have to draw a line in the sand versus aesthetics and developing, your core for aesthetics and the slim waist and, having those abs pop out versus performance and actually utilizing the trunk to be able to effectively transfer energy between your upper and lower halves and just overall use it for better performance. High repetition, basic exercises, things like that that maybe bodybuilders like to use as far as methods isn't going to be as effective on the field or court, right? So with that being said, just like with anything in performance or athletic development, we need to realize that there's a progression to everything. You can't just mindlessly program random core exercises and expect to have optimal development. So first, let me start off by breaking down the 4 basic fundamental patterns of the trunk, right? So we would actually split these up into our programming and making sure that over the course of a week, we check the box on all 4 of these movements. Number 1, let's say basic flexion, right? This is gonna be your sit-ups, things of that nature. Number 2 is gonna be extension. Number 3 is gonna be rotation. And number 4 is gonna be lateral flexion. So with that being said, we wanna make sure, again, that we're checking the box by hitting each of those over the course of the week so that we're bringing balance to the athlete. So let's get into the most simplistic 3-phase model that we utilize that essentially starts athletes down on square one, build brick by brick and progress through complexity, intensity, and then obviously progression. So first and foremost, we're gonna start with static movements, okay? And these are going to be anti-movements. We're still gonna fit this within these 4-day scheme. However, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do anti-flexion, anti-extension, anti-rotation, and anti-lateral flexion. Things such as planks, side planks, suitcase walks, anti-rotation movements, just things that are going to be able to support those movements. While also the goal is for us to build a foundation for which then the athlete can build upon and really be able to hone in on all those little intrinsic muscles up and down the spine to be able to then support better movement and better quality repetitions when we actually start getting a little bit more dynamic with it. Which then leads us to our step or phase 2 in the off season of our core training, which is gonna be your standard fundamental movements. Now, this is where you could get a little bit more creative with it. You can add resistance, you can add some speed to certain things, but it follows the same guidelines. We're gonna perform our basic flexion, extension, rotation, lateral flexion. So as an example, if in phase 1 we perform a plank for anti-flexion, now we could do something like a hanging leg raise for flexion, or a sit-up, or some kind of variation, right? Like a med ball slam, something of that where the athlete is then performing it, again, basic flexion movement. Then after we've established that and we've isolated and worked those through the basic fundamental movements, we then are going to go into our final phase, which could be extended and it could be, a series of 1 to 2 phases. But this is where we couple our movements, right? And this is where we have more integrated movements. So what does that actually look like? It still follows the same path of flexion, extension, rotation, lateral flexion, but now what we're trying to achieve is we are trying to essentially integrate both halves, the upper and lower body, right? So the athlete might need to stabilize through the lower body while performing something with the upper body and transfer that energy. This could also be something a little bit more sport specific. It could be something where we're working something through the lower half, like a lunge, while having one side unilateral resistance. So let's say we perform a unilateral suitcase lunge, right? So they're getting the stimulus to the lower body and having the support, right, anti-lateral flexion in the upper body. Or we can add a lunge with a rotation. So the athlete can then take some form of resistance, and as they're lunging, they need to perform some level of rotation. And again, depending on the athlete, you can then get a little bit more creative on the demands and the needs of that athlete. The other thing that we start to introduce here, and we introduce throughout, is being able to work through the sling system. So the lat, right, the posterior sling system, the lat and the opposing glute are connected. So how are we doing exercises things such as plank bird dogs, things like that, and we can add some level of resistance, or by doing a row while we're doing some level of, glute activation on the opposite side. These are all examples of integrated movements that are going to continue to support that athlete, right, to be able to transfer that energy through the upper and lower halves and be able to force couple those segments of the body, if you will. So I hope that helps out. Very basic 3-phase. Make sure you're checking the box on all 4 of these throughout the week. Make sure that you're having some level of progression from the lowest level all the way up, leading them into the most dynamic movement that's going to support them on their field or court or sport in general. So as long as you have that, you have a level of progression, you're gonna overall optimally develop the athlete. Use this. Hey, if you're a coach that wants more insight on some of the programming that we do, go ahead and check out the link down below. I hope to be able to work with you guys. Talk to you next time.